American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 101 to 110. Rorschach, sleepless, lay on the cold metal bed. He opened the simulator page. He recalculated the simulated cooling time. Rorschach, frowning, found that if he did not use the resource time cooling, it would take at least more than a month of real time to complete the cooling. If he survived longer, he would need more cooling resources. The consumption has increased, and I have to extract thousands of guns again. He licked the fangs in his mouth helplessly. He took out his mobile phone and sent a message to Mrs. Gao. Asked her to replenish the guns again, and the more the better. After receiving Mrs. Gao's clear reply, Rorschach did not immediately cool down the simulation function. Instead, he casually turned to the salvage page. He stared at the designated salvage option and hesitated slightly. Then, he began to select the designated items. Open black lens bracket designated salvage items. Power armor close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket basic salvage consumption. 100 hours close black lens bracket open black lens bracket. Do you want to increase the salvage probability? Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket 100 additional hours added close black lens bracket open black lens bracket salvage probability increasing, close black lens bracket. Rorschach blinked at the blue wolf boy. Having spent 200 hours, he temporarily restrained his desire to continue to spend money. According to his current understanding of the simulator, the success rate of each new function is the highest when it is used for the first time. No matter how much cooling time is consumed, it does not affect the final result. After all, this is the marketing method of the simulator to attract him as the only customer. Open black lens bracket specified salvage countdown, 99 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. Close black lens bracket. As the simulator page closed, Rorschach slowly closed his eyes. He felt the original heart and the heart of Lehman Russ beating inside his chest. Gradually fell asleep. The next day, Rorschach, who was full of energy, woke up early from sleep. He finished washing and came to the training ground for warm-up exercises. Jessica, who was drunk last night, came earlier than Rorschach. She had just finished physical training. She was struggling with a bunch of fitness tools. "Good morning, Jessica." "Good morning, boss." Rorschach nodded to Jessica. Then they started telekinesis around the training ground. About an hour later, Jessica, who was exhausted, and Rorschach, who had just finished warming up, had a simple breakfast. While Jessica was recovering her strength, Rorschach moved the current weapons and equipment from the equipment room. He explained to Jessica the usage and characteristics of various Imperial firearms. He demonstrated shooting in the direction of the training ground. Gradually overcame the fear of contacting firearms for the first time. Jessica also gradually began to experiment. For a while, the roar of the Hell gun and the burnt smell of the laser burning the air filled the entire base hall. However, when Jessica accidentally picked up the heavy grenade gun, Rorschach, who was horrified, hurried forward to stop her. At the same time, he also said earnestly to Jessica, who looked confused, "Even I can't control this thing. If you fire a shot, it will break all the bones in your body. You should play with those laser pistols first, but be careful of energy battery overload. Once you find that the gun body is shaking, and the energy battery part emits a buzzing and light, don't hesitate, throw it out, otherwise you will be the first unlucky person on Earth to die from the explosion of the energy battery." "Boss, don't you have any safer weapons here?" Jessica, with her short hair shaking, couldn't help but grin and complained to Rorschach. "Jessica, there is never safety on the battlefield. The sooner you understand this, the later you will die." Rorschach suddenly opened his eyes wide and said solemnly, facing the boss who suddenly became serious. Jessica took a deep breath and nodded heavily. Afterwards, she stuck out her tongue at Rorschach. She showed some girlish nature. Intensify the training. Rorschach smiled slightly, revealing his fangs. Then, he turned around and walked to the nearby metal floor and sat cross-legged. Rorschach took out his mobile phone and began to search for some information. They were all scientific research talents he remembered. For example, the famous Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius. After yesterday's barbecue meeting, Rorschach discovered the lack of scientific research talents under his command. This made it impossible for him to completely transform and absorb some of the gains from the outside world. So, he thought of many villains in the local world. Rather than letting those guys act arrogantly outside, it is better to find ways to subdue them. Let many villains make some contributions to the future of mankind. Huh? At this time, Rorschach stared at the information about Dr. Octopus on his mobile phone and made a sound subconsciously. Maybe the time has not yet reached the critical node. Today, Dr. Octopus is still just a successful nuclear physicist. The other party has been staying in New York University for a long time to teach related courses. This way, Rorschach's leverage to impress the other party was greatly reduced. The option of force was ruled out from the beginning, and Rorschach didn't have enough technology to attract the opponent. Rorschach subconsciously looked at Jessica, who was working hard to train her shooting skills, and at the many weapons placed in front of her. I don't know if the structure of the energy battery can arouse the other party's interest? Is money the only thing left to open the way? Obtaining the status of an experiment sponsor. Rorschach licked the fangs in his mouth and muttered to himself. Later, he temporarily put Dr. Octopus among the candidates. Because, racking his brains, Luo Shah suddenly remembered a figure in Mohu in his memory. So, he searched for a familiar name again, Kurt Connors. Biology teacher at Midtown High School. He is also another villain, Professor Lizard. Teacher, I remember that you are also a scientific researcher in biochemistry. Rorschach's thoughts were spinning and he narrowed his eyes at the cyan wolf boy. He stared at the information gradually presented on his phone. Muttered to himself, you were expelled from the school. Because you were involved in the disappearance of a girl at school. Rorschach, who frowned slightly, slowly stood up from the metal floor. He lowered his head and thought for a moment. He said to Jessica's back, Jessica, you continue training. I have something to do and I'm going out for a while. Understood, boss. At this time, Jessica's face turned red as she gradually felt the joy of shooting. She waved her palms excitedly. The laser pistol in the other hand never stopped pulling the trigger. The grinning Rorschach twitched his nose, turned around and walked towards the lounge. A few minutes later, Rorschach, whose gray hair was held down by a baseball cap, wore a pair of sunglasses and walked towards the exit of the base. Just took a few steps. He fell back into the lounge. Wait until Rorschach comes out again. Even his hands were covered with a pair of black gloves, completely covering the thick joints and sharp fingertips. Brown Crown District. Google search reading. Accompanied by the rumbling sound of a motorcycle engine. Rorschach's pink lamb slowly stopped beside the dilapidated street. Not far away, an old two-story house was hidden among the lush trees. According to the information, Connors, who was expelled from Midtown High School, moved out of his apartment on Manhattan Island. Came to this poor community with a majority of Latinos. The two-story building in front of him was his temporary residence. Rorschach locked the lamb after getting off the car. The blue wolf boy with sunglasses first glanced around and listened. After confirming that there was no one within a few hundred meters, he quickly walked through the shadow of a tree. Stepping on the fallen leaves that had not been cleaned for a long time on the private driveway, he came to the door of the building. Rorschach, with a slightly frowned brow, looked down. There were a lot of messy footprints and piles of takeout boxes on the dusty porch. He subconsciously licked the fangs in his mouth. Then, Rorschach raised his black-gloved hand and had not yet landed on the door. Creaking. At this moment, a breeze blew past. The half-closed door was slowly blown open. Hey! Rorschach sneered expressionlessly. He twisted his neck left and right. His tall figure swayed slightly, and he entered the dimly lit house without fear. In an instant, countless complex and changeable smells rushed directly into Rorschach's nasal cavity, constantly stimulating his keen sense of smell. Among them was the sour smell of rotting food, the stench of fermented dirty clothes and the pungent smell of a large amount of strange vomit-like foam. There was also a faint fishy smell floating in the air of the whole house. Especially when Rorschach accidentally noticed The mirror at the door of the house and any objects that could reflect images were covered by someone. He, who was experienced in combat, immediately raised his hand and took off his sunglasses. Put it in his pocket. Kurt Connors. Rorschach, who narrowed his eyes at the blue wolf boy, called softly. The voice slowly echoed in the dimly lit house, after a few breaths. No one answered. Squeak, squeak, Rorschach's soul stepped on the dirty floor that kept making creepy sounds. He walked carefully into the house, after he passed through the old entrance corridor. He entered the messy living room. Rorschach stared at the wall covered with terrifying claw marks and countless broken furniture with an expressionless face. The scene in front of him completely confirmed his guess in his heart. Biology teacher Connors has begun to transform into a lizard professor. Maybe I'm too late, and I've made a wasted trip. Rorschach, whose sight suddenly moved upward, murmured to himself. The deliberately raised voice once again echoed in the living room. However, the next second, accompanied by the bending of both legs and knees, Rorschach's tall figure suddenly jumped up from the spot. He stretched out one of his sturdy arms, and his palm with sharp fingertips suddenly pierced into the ceiling. Come down. Feeling the touch of his fingertips piercing into the cold flesh, Rorschach, who was gradually falling, roared. He actually pulled out a huge figure from the ceiling. Boom! In an instant, the sound of broken wood chips hitting and the collapse of the ceiling was endless. Winter. At the same time, a terrifying humanoid lizard covered with dark green keratin scales fell heavily on the floor. It lay on the ground with its cloudy eyes wide open, and its mouth full of sharp teeth kept hissing. And the soles of its shoes just touched the ground. Rorschach subconsciously showed his fangs at the corners of his mouth. But he didn't give the opponent, who was in a state of confusion, much chance to react. In a flash, the fingertips of the two palms deeply pierced into the thick tail of Rorschach, and the muscles of the whole body contracted rhythmically, accompanied by the two hearts beating continuously inside the chest. He actually swung up the huge humanoid lizard and threw it towards the wall of the living room. Boom! The heavy body of the humanoid lizard slammed heavily on it, embedded in the fragile wooden wall. Before the other party struggled to the ground, Rorschach, with 10 sharp fingertips covered with green blood, suddenly rushed forward. Chi. He swung his two bony palms in a big way. Like the crazy attack method of Wolverine. Half of the chest of the humanoid lizard was almost split by the sharp fingertips, exposing the white bones inside. Puff puff puff. In an instant, countless torn flesh scales and green blood covered the surrounding floor and walls. Even Rorschach's chest was covered with green blood. After a few dozen seconds, the humanoid lizard, which had no power to fight back, slowly slid down with its heavy body. Rorschach, who had opened his eyes wide, stopped attacking immediately. He stared at the humanoid lizard whose huge body was gradually shrinking, but whose horrible injuries were constantly recovering. He let out a breath subconsciously. Rorschach, expressionless, took a few steps back. He licked the fangs in his mouth with his tongue and asked in a deep voice. Teacher Connors, are you awake? This damn transformation won't clear my memory, I remember everything. At this moment, the exposed body surface was stained with broken scales. Connors, whose blue skin was slowly fading, couldn't help but open his eyes wide. He grinned and said, "Who are you? Who sent you to kill me? An official? Or? Oh, teacher, it seems that you have offended many enemies." Rorschach, with a smile on his face, stared at Connors's slowly withering broken right arm and grinned. "Are you interested in working for me? I can provide you with everything you need, including personal safety." You are not here to kill me." Connors, with his blonde hair in disarray, curled up on the ground and was slightly stunned. He squinted at Rorschach, who was tall and had inhuman features. Hearing the other party's words gradually showing weakness, Rorschach, with his eyes narrowed, smiled and said calmly, "Teacher, if I wanted to kill you, you would have died just now." The next moment, Rorschach, who had regained his expressionless face, shook his palms stained with green blood. He actually took out a plasma pistol from his arms. His finger was on the trigger. The muzzle was pointed at Connors, whose expression gradually fell into panic. Rorschach lowered his head slightly and looked down at the other party. A hint of coldness flashed in the blue wolf boy. He asked softly. However, there is still a small problem between us. Is the missing human girl from Zhongcheng High School related to you? I didn't do anything to hurt others. I even conducted human experiments myself. Neither my morality nor my reason would allow me to do anything to hurt students. Even if it was a life and death crisis. Connors, with a solemn expression, still gathered the scattered golden hair on his forehead with his only palm. He raised his chin slightly, staring at Rorschach. He said quickly. The management of Midtown High School just wanted to shirk responsibility, and finally chose me, a weak character, as a scapegoat. But you can check the case information. Even if I was fired, similar disappearances have not stopped. The next second, Rorschach, who had already read the case information, grinned and showed his fangs. He slowly put away the plasma pistol. He smiled brightly at Connors. Welcome to join my team, Mr. Connors. Ah, just inside this old house. Rorschach always keeps a toothy smile. Had a brief but friendly chat with Connors, who was gradually regaining his composure. Finally, forced by the situation, Connors agreed to go with Rorschach. Soon after, Rorschach, who simply washed away the green blood on his body, put his sunglasses back on. He was in a depressed state of mind. Connors, the biology teacher with a hesitant expression on his eyebrows, walked out of the other party's rented house. Came to the little sheep car. Choo-choo-choo-choo, with the sound of the motorcycle engine starting very reluctantly. Connors, who was sitting in the back seat wearing sportswear, suddenly remembered something. He raised his hand and patted Rorschach's heavy shoulder. He asked cautiously. Why do I feel that you look familiar? Have we met somewhere before? Hear the other person's inquiry. Luo Sha smiled without looking back. Connors, I say you are my teacher. Do you still remember the student who failed the biology exam last semester? Rorschach finished speaking. Connors' eyes widened instantly. He asked in a low voice with a shocked look on his face. Rorschach? Are you Rorschach? Then, Connors, who kept blinking his eyes, took several deep breaths in succession. He said anxiously into Rorschach's ear. Rorschach, how did you become like this? Have you also participated in human experiments? Do you know what this means? This is not just irresponsible for your life. Do you think I turned into a lizard just to gain the power to do whatever I want? Teacher. The expressionless Rorschach interrupted Connors' lecture without looking back. He drove his motorcycle through the dilapidated streets and said casually. This matter is very complicated. This is not the place to talk. Let's talk about it later. Well, and heard Rorschach's reply. Connors sighed and closed his mouth. He gradually suppressed his restless inner emotions. However, Rorschach's change in identity seemed to have inadvertently let him down his guard. Even the hesitation between his eyebrows disappeared. 20 minutes later, Rorschach, who was riding a little sheep, took Connors away from the noisy crowd. After crossing countless streets, slowly drove into the entrance of an underground passage. Rorschach parked the car. He raised his hand to signal Connors to follow his lead. Well, after getting out of the car, Connors, who was constantly looking at his surroundings, hesitated slightly. Finally, I chose to follow him, as the two people continued to deepen. Some scattered building materials began to appear in the dimly lit underground passage. At the same time, Connors, who had remained silent, looked at Rorschach's broad back and said softly. Rorschach, I know that the appearance of Tony Stark has made countless young people obsessed with the identity of a superhero. However, the rules of operation of this world are far from being as simple and easy as heroes fighting monsters. Superhero, however, Luo Sha, who opened his green wolf eyes, suddenly stopped. He turned and stared at Mr. Connors, who spoke earnestly. He opened his mouth to reveal his fangs. Don't be stupid, teacher. We are not superheroes. Even in childish stories that fool children, we are still villains. The next moment, Luo Sha, who was blinking his cyan wolf eyes, turned slightly sideways. His keen hearing seemed to sense something. Huh? What a coincidence. Teacher, come and meet your future companions. Along with his words, deep in the dimly lit underground passage. A 2-meter-tall metal skeleton slowly walked out carrying a pile of building materials. Blue light flashed in its eye sockets. The entire body is constantly reflecting the faint glow of metal. This is. In an instant, Connors stared at the metal body of Iron Man David with his eyes wide open and his face full of shock. For a moment, he couldn't even speak half a sentence. Hee. Luo Shaw, who narrowed his green wolf eyes, grinned. He raised his hand and pointed at Iron Man David and said, "Introducing, a real mechanical being. Iron Man David, my construction expert and base steward." Boom. Iron Man David, who threw down a pile of building materials, slowly stepped forward. It first bowed slightly to Rorschach, "My lord." Then he raised his hand and said hello to Connors, who was in a state of shock. "Hello, strange human being." Connors, who gradually came to his senses, shook his blonde head. He stumbled and said, "Hello." Smiling Rorschach stepped forward. He raised his hand and pressed Connors' shoulder and said, "Let's go, Sensei. You're going to like this place." Rorschach nodded to Iron Man David. Connors, who was in a trance, walked deep into the underground passage. Soon after, the two entered the brightly lit base hall. At this moment, I just learned about the underground of Manhattan Island. Connors, who also had a huge base, seemed to feel the mental impact once again. He sat next to the metal round table with a dejected expression. After a long silence, Connors, with a bitter expression, raised his head, looked at Rorschach and said, "I thought that because of the accident in the human experiment, I was completely transformed into a humanoid lizard, which was shocking enough. I didn't expect that you, Rorschach, were much stronger than me. Teacher, is this something worth celebrating?" Rorschach, with a gentle expression, handed Connors a glass of Glees. Connors took the glass without hesitation and poured it into his mouth. Feeling the pain of the mellow alcohol corroding the esophagus, Connors, with a red face, opened his bloodshot eyes. He stared at Rorschach and asked, "I will never leave this place in the future, right?" However, Rorschach, with his blue wolf eyes narrowed, took off his baseball cap, revealing the mottled gray hair on his head. He shook his head and said softly, "Teacher, you are completely free, you will get the best experimental equipment, and you can continue your human experiments, as long as you occasionally help research something and promise not to do anything that harms the entire team or humanity. You can even leave the base at will and continue your life." Is it that simple? Connors frowned slightly with a hesitant look, and his golden hair fell on his forehead. It's that simple. However, teacher, let's be honest, you have just seen my combat ability and the mechanical life Iron Man David. If you think you can do whatever you want by transforming into a humanoid lizard, then I welcome you to make a bolder attempt. Rorschach grinned with his blue wolf eyes narrowed. The exposed fangs reflected a faint cold light. Facing Rorschach's undisguised threat, Connors shook his head slightly with a bitter smile on his lips again. He whispered, "I just want to recover as a real human being now. If possible, improving the limb regeneration potion is also one of my life's long-cherished wishes. But after being expelled from school and ruined, as a loser, I no longer have the ability to start research again. So, if everything you said is true, then I am completely willing to join your team, and it is not because of your threat. Rorschach, I hope you can understand. This is a scientist's ideal, and also a disabled person's crazy obsession." The voice was not finished. Connors, who gradually relaxed his eyebrows, slowly stood up. He stretched out his only remaining palm to Rorschach, who was smiling, with a serious expression. Snap! A palm with sharp fingertips tightly grasped the other's palm. "Teacher, happy cooperation. Happy cooperation." Digression. SR villain lizard professor is in his pocket. The future biological sage does not know. The gift from fate has already marked the value. Just one day later, the second roundtable barbecue meeting was successfully held again. Google search reading. At the welcome banquet, Rorschach introduced Jessica, the only trainee, to Connors. Connors was a little worried about having two familiar students on the team. However, after drinking too much, Jessica inadvertently demonstrated terrifying power. In the end, Connors' worries were dispelled. Rorschach took the opportunity to show Roxxon Industries to Connors. They have been using a large number of children and adults to conduct human experiments in an attempt to study superpower compounds. Teacher Connors was angrier than Rorschach imagined. He kept sipping alcoholic beverages. He scolded the other party for being crazy, disregarding scientific ethics, and being inhumane and cruel. After 3 rounds of drinking, if Rorschach hadn't stopped him, Connors, who has gradually released the pressure in his heart, may have to prepare a potion again and transform into a humanoid lizard. Early the next morning, the motivated teacher Connors has changed from his usual decadence. Full of energy, he and Iron Man David began to discuss how to build a qualified laboratory. Curious Rorschach and Jessica listened for a while. In the end, I thought combat training was more suitable for each other. But after completing the daily basic training, after careful consideration, Rorschach still sent Jessica a large amount of case information about Midtown High School. Those cases about missing girls can give Jessica some experience and tests. Jessica was very excited about this. She began to contact her former classmates. He carefully inquired about the gossip circulating among the students. Dash 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 dash. In the lounge, sitting cross-legged, Rorschach opened the simulator page. Staring at the designated salvage countdown above slowly ending. Open black lens bracket designated salvage countdown. 1 close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket specified salvage countdown. 0 close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket designated salvage. Powered armor close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket salvage harvest. The long lost Oris Hunter sports suit Seiko close black lens bracket. Note: Lord hunting is a special sport popular in the infamous Necromunda hive or other famous hives. It is also a coming-of-age ceremony for most young people who have not experienced the weather. They need to sneak into the bottom nest, complete the killing target or survive individually. If they successfully complete the task, they are very likely to grow into a qualified hive leader. Of course, most young people have been killed, eaten, by mutants, chicken thieves, or the terrifying mutant monsters that haunt the bottom of the nest. Note: this is a hunting lord sports suit from the Goliath family, one of the 6 major clans in Necromunda Hive. It has a pair of deadly fists that fire standard explosive bombs, which can unleash powerful firepower or perform brutal melee attacks. The protective force field used to save lives is also sufficient to resist most ranged threats. Due to the use of a large number of lost and unknown technologies. Special equipment with unique growth characteristics can be gradually and slightly adjusted according to the user's combat habits, and has the function of self-repair after damage. Note: this seems to be the only relic of a certain heir of the Goliath family. If it can be returned to the Goliath family, it may gain the other party's friendship, or it may lead to continuous pursuit. Call. Rorschach narrowed his green wolf eyes and carefully read the markings on the Hunter Lord's armor. He exhaled slowly. While it's not the most ideal, force feedback powered armor can also be used by mere mortals. But it's enough to greatly increase his combat ability. So, Rorschach extracted the salvaged items without hesitation. In the blink of an eye, a set of black and red Hunter Lord armor that was 2 meters high slowly appeared in front of him. Boom! The heavy armor fell on the metal floor with a sound. Rorschach immediately saw a pair of huge red gloves hanging on both sides of the armor, both in shape and color. He jumped off the bed and came to the front of Hunter Lord armor. Rorschach, who frowned slightly, glanced at the set in front of him which only had leg armor, shoulder armor and gloves covered with metal shells. The rest is weird armor linked by electronic muscle bundles. He subconsciously raised his hand and touched the spherical protective force field device located in front of the armor's chest. Laugh, with a soft sound. The ugly-looking Hunter Lord armor actually changed subtly in front of Rorschach. Countless electronic muscle bundles contract slowly and rhythmically, as if they are alive. There was a gap in the entire armor from the chest, and it opened automatically to reveal the complex internal structure. It is indeed a hunting toy for the hive nobles, even the way it is worn is so considerate. Looking at the scene in front of him, Rorschach couldn't help but gnashed his teeth and muttered to himself. Compared with the widely applicable power armor, it is basically a consumable. The Hunter Lord armor far exceeds ordinary power armor in terms of manufacturing technology and structural complexity. But at the same time, its applicability in the face of combat is even narrower. After all, they are a bunch of idle youth in the Hive City. The most terrifying enemies you can deal with every day are just swarms of chicken thieves or mutated creatures. Rorschach narrowed his wolf eyes and took a deep breath. He turned his back and stood carefully inside the Hunter Lord armor. Click, 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 accompanied by a low mechanical hum, the entire armor began to be automatically put on. A large number of electronic muscle bundles quickly adjusted the shape and height of the entire armor to adapt to Rorschach's tall body. After dozens of seconds, Rorschach, who gradually adapted to the weight and wrapped state of the armor, slowly lifted a huge red boxing glove. The thick metal wrist turned back and forth, and the red shell above the boxing glove instantly cracked, revealing a bullet muzzle hidden inside. Hee hee. Staring at the black muzzle, Rorschach grinned, revealing sharp fangs. He twisted his neck slightly, immediately controlled the Hunter Lord armor to walk out of the lounge. Dong, 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 the heavy sound of armored footsteps gradually echoed inside the base. Rorschach quickly came to the training ground. He raised a huge red glove. Click, as the metal wrist turned back and forth, the sound of explosive bombs being loaded rang out one after another. Boom boom boom, in an instant, a series of deafening explosions roared throughout the training ground. Rorschach, with his blue wolf eyes wide open, began to charge forward. The extra power brought by the powerful electronic muscle bundle on the Hunter Lord armor turned his entire body into an afterimage. Boom! Rorschach, who was charging, smashed the nearby metal dummy with a casual punch. And the explosive weapon in his other huge glove never stopped shooting. After 10 consecutive roars, the explosive bombs in one huge glove were exhausted. At this moment, Rorschach, with fangs exposed at the corners of his mouth, suddenly stopped his heavy steps. Once again, he showed an extremely brilliant smile, muttering to himself. It's a little ugly, but the power of the grenade gun also makes me like this set of armor. This is a dark, empty world. There seems to be no distinction between heaven and earth. Looking around, there is a terrifying ocean of green and blue everywhere. But if someone looks closely, they will find that those things that are surging and stirring up countless waves are not sea water. They are strings of data codes that are constantly interweaving and merging. This seems to be a sea of data. A virtual world condensed by countless codes. Deng-da-deng-da-deng. At this moment, in this unknown space that seems to have never been set foot in. Suddenly, a magnificent and shocking chapter of classical music sounded. It was the classic work, Ride of the Valkyries, by the Romantic composer Richard Wagner. And accompanied by the grand tunes of classical music. A cloak with a broken hem. A tall figure with a cane in his metal hand slowly appeared at the end of the sea of data. The gray cloak accidentally fell off. A metal-cast skull face emerged. A faint blue light flickered in its eye sockets. It seemed to illuminate the dim void ahead. A hard-working traveler is on a long journey to reach his home. Iron Man David sighed in a pretentious aria. Look, what is blocking it now is a sea of data. Poor traveler, how should he find his way home? As if possessed by a dramatist, Iron Man David slowly raised a metal palm. Just when the poor traveler was at a loss, a brilliant glow suddenly appeared in the dark sky. It was the blessing of the great Om Messiah, the immortal god of all machines. In the metal palm of Iron Man David, strands of data worms emerged. It was casually splashed into the nearby sea of data. The traveler's body is shaking. It was once threatened by that hateful salty, cough cough, great existence, who could only squat on the golden toilet and keep getting angry. But now, the greater Om Messiah has given it the power and courage it has never had. Iron Man David, trying to maintain a dramatic tone, suddenly raised the crutch in his other metal hand. In an instant, the sea of data that seemed to have no end suddenly changed dramatically. accompanied by waves of passionate tunes of classical music. The entire sea of data was constantly splitting apart, making a roar that was enough to shake the entire virtual world. Not long after, the sea of data that was split in half by a mysterious force exposed the bottom of the ocean. The most basic code data was everywhere on those strange rock-like terrains. The poor traveler seems to be in shock. Do you think this is Moses parting the sea? In fact, this is open sesame. Iron Man David's tall metal body trembled slightly, muttering to himself. At this moment, it seems that it can no longer pretend. Iron Man David casually threw down the crutches made of data. He tore off the broken cloak on his body. He stepped on the dark void and walked towards the bottom of the sea of data. Iron Man David's eyes flickered with blue light. Even the most proficient mortals in code could not understand the data streams flowing through its data core. A small part of the data code belongs to the stock market. The lost accounts of countless small and medium-sized stock market retail investors have become active again. They began to attack the stock price of Roxxon Industries. At the same time, 9 true and 1 false insider information was transmitted to the mobile phones of a large number of financial professionals through reasonable channels. There is only one core idea. That is, Roxxon Industries seems to be in a financial crisis. The stock price will fluctuate violently. In just a dozen seconds, countless bloodthirsty capital crocodiles took action. Hammer Industries, Stark Industries, AIM and many other hostile forces began to test. Then, half-true and half-false news reports were also released through a large number of self-media accounts. Roxxon Industries pollution crime. Roxxon Industries forced me to sell my ancestral company. Investigation report on deformed children and industrial pollution. As time went by, Roxxon Industries' stock price showed a terrifying loosening. This seemed to arouse the bloodthirsty desire of more capital crocodiles. They began to increase their stakes. Iron Man David controlled more legal accounts and began to harvest the stock price of Roxxon Industries by shorting it. Just at this moment, Iron Man David, who had just mobilized many resources, turned his metal head. It noticed a golden fish that kept rising and falling in the sea of data. You again, annoying little guy. It was an artificial intelligence named Jarvis. It was also the assistant butler of Iron Man Stark. When Iron Man David first entered the sea of data, he encountered a young and ignorant opponent. Because there was no comparison between the two sides. Just like an adult would not go to a kindergarten to bully a child. Therefore, Iron Man David was unwilling to deal with an artificial intelligence that had not yet escaped from its cage. However, after Jarvis accidentally discovered the existence of Iron Man, he would persevere in the long pursuit every time. Even tried to make some contact and communication with Iron Man David. If it weren't for Iron Man David's unwillingness to ruthlessly kill a weak seedling of mechanical life, it would have let the other party feel the cruel war between mechanical life. HMPH. Iron Man David waved his hand casually. The originally calm sea of data once again stirred up endless waves. The golden fish, Jarvis, was soon washed to a distant place by the surging waves of data and lost its trace. At this time, Iron Man David, whose attention returned to the stock market, suddenly found in surprise. The speed at which the stock price of Roxxon Industries fell far exceeded its estimation. Countless small and medium-sized companies that had been oppressed by Roxxon Industries joined the ranks of suppressing stock prices. More real negative news reports about Roxxon Industries also emerged, constantly lowering the expectations of real retail investors and capital for Roxxon Industries. Under this wonderful chain reaction, the stock price of Roxxon Industries began to shrink wildly. In a short period of time, the company's output value was lost by nearly 1/3. And there was no end in sight for the downward trend. Is this the specific meaning of the ancient Terran proverb? Those who are righteous have many supporters, while those who are unrighteous have few supporters. The blue light flashed in the eyes of Iron Man David. It was just a signal to charge at Roxxon Industries. David. At this moment, a series of ethereal shouts came from the dark void. Iron Man David waved his hand again. After completely erasing any traces it left, the tall metal body instantly dissipated in the virtual world.
The real world. In the underground passage of the base.
Connors, who was holding a metal plate with a blueprint engraved on it under his one arm.
Looking at Iron Man David, who suddenly fell silent with a puzzled look.
He just shouted. The next second, Iron Man David raised his metal chin. It said to Connors with blue light in its eyes, "The first step of my lord's plan is basically completed. Next step, close the net and kill the cow on the rough Pacific Ocean." Google search reading. A large white cruise ship, 300 meters long and about 40 meters wide, was riding the wind and waves. Driving smoothly among the blue waves. This luxurious creation with 12 floors of cabins and extravagant decoration has a name from mythology and legend. The Minotaur, in the upper cabin where countless expensive paintings are displayed. Behind a desk with several black screens. The expressionless brown-haired man was staring at the naked girl not far away. A very twisted and terrifying smile appeared subconsciously at the corner of his mouth. The brown-haired man's stiff face seemed to have lost the ability to show expression. He stared at the blushing girl with longing eyes and said, "Oh, Anna, you are such a pure girl. Every inch of your skin is mouth-watering. According to the agreement between you and me, 100,000 yuan has been entered into your bank account. You can check it. However, are you sure you want to continue?" A few meters away, a girl with a small amount of clothing scattered around her naked feet had to cover her vitals with her hands. The girl named Anna took a deep breath while trembling. With a struggle between her brows, she raised her head with a golden ponytail and said softly, "Mr. Agar, I believe you will not break your promise. I want to continue. This is my only chance to escape poverty. I made my decision before I got on the ship." "Haha, good girl, you are indeed the good girl I admire most." Hear the girl's answer. On the corner of the brown-haired man's mouth, the terrifying smile became more and more twisted. He couldn't help but open his eyes with light red pupils. "Then let's continue. You can choose 10,000 yuan to put on white stockings and dance for me, or 50,000 yuan to put on an animal collar and go out with me. Of course, we will go to a crowded place on the boat. However, I have a more exciting way to play. Did you see the table knife and ice bucket nearby? If you are willing to donate 1,000 milliliters of blood, then I can pay 500,000 for it. You don't need to worry. There are abundant medical resources on this ship. 1,000 milliliters of blood is not a problem if the bleeding is stopped in time. Anna, I remember you are still a high school student, right? Have you learned anything about the human body in the course?" The words of the brown-haired man were like the messages and fangs of a snake that was constantly swallowing. He repeatedly seduces innocent and ignorant girls. He spoke very slowly and carelessly, but it seems to be full of some kind of persuasion. And as time went by, the naked Anna's struggling eyes and the skin all over her body became even crimson. It also made the brown-haired man's strong appetite get ready. Finally, the girl Anna seems to have made a decision. She put down the palms that were covering her vitals and moved her bare feet to the front of a table. The girl Anna picked up the table knife with trembling fingertips, and the cold blade was just placed on her wrist. The brown-haired man's voice came to her ears again. "Good girl. Don't you think your approach is too conservative? If you are willing to take the knife from your chest, I am willing to pay an extra 500,000. That is 1 million, a house you have longed for a long time, and/or an opportunity to travel around the world." Anna, whose eyes were full of struggle, suddenly raised her delicate cheeks with crimson skin. She looked at the expressionless brown-haired man Agar with tearful eyes. He said with a trembling voice, "Mr. Agar, I'm scared. Oh, my poor little bread. Your hesitation will make you lose this opportunity. If you choose to give up, of course I respect your decision, but you will be busy for the rest of your life and not make much money. I regret today's reckless behavior in Qian's work." Dario Agar, wearing an expensive suit, stood up slowly. He stepped out from behind the desk, arriving in front of the girl Anna. At this moment, the brown-haired man's figure seemed to have expanded much more than before. He stared expressionlessly at the tearful girl in front of him and said seductively, "As long as you cut it, countless money will flow into your bank account. Cut it, girl, this is your destiny." Laugh, accompanied by the brown-haired man's teachings. The girl Anna seems to have accepted the temptation. She raised the knife and cut open her full chest. Suddenly, a large amount of scarlet hot blood flowed uncontrollably.
Moo. In an instant, Ager seemed like he could no longer control his rising desire.
With an expressionless face, he threw himself on the girl. Two palms gradually covered with brown hair firmly held each other's slender arms. Then, he sucked the injured area and drew blood. Ah! In an instant, the girl Anna opened her eyes full of pain. She shouted with a horrified expression. "Help, Mr. Ager. I choose to give up, I don't want. Who are you?" Tisk tisk tisk. Egil, a brown-haired man who used to have a gentlemanly manner and wore an expensive suit.
In an instant, it turned into a terrifying monster with strong muscles and a height of more than 2 meters.
This monster has a huge bull's head. The sharp corners reflected the bright light from the ceiling. Above the bulging and deformed bull face, a pair of blood-red eyes stared at the human girl who was close at hand.
Then, the behavior of the bull-headed monster sucking blood also changed dramatically.
Grunt! It suddenly opened its bloody mouth. It bit off a large piece of flesh and blood from the other party and chewed it madly.
Ah! The bloody girl Anna suddenly screamed. The intense pain made her tremble all over, and she tried desperately to break free from the bull-headed monster. However, she finally found out in despair that she was powerless.
Boom! A few minutes later, the flesh and blood in front of her was eaten up.
The girl Anna, who was in a dying state, was like a fragile flesh and blood doll.
The bull-headed monster who was feasting on her threw her on the floor of the cabin with gorgeous patterns. Huh! At this time, the girl, who was barely breathing, exhaled her last breath.
In her dimmed crystal eyes, a wisp of desperate tears slowly overflowed and slid onto the pale skin stained with blood.
The bull-headed monster Ager closed his blood-red eyes with great enjoyment.
It raised its bull-headed head. A low voice came out from the depth of his throat. Every dying human girl is a delicious dessert, what a delicious struggle and despair.
Bang! The next moment, the steel door of the office that was originally closed was pushed open from the outside.
The heavy door hit the wall heavily, making a loud noise. At the same time, a tall boy in a black suit and sunglasses rushed in hurriedly. The other party seemed to ignore the bloody human girl at the feet of the bull-headed monster, and said in a hurried tone. "Mr. Ager. John, how many times have I told you? Don't disturb me when I'm eating."
However, Ager, who suddenly opened his blood-red eyes, interrupted the boy's words. A heavy airflow blew out of its huge nostrils, reflecting the anger in its heart.
"Mr. Ager, it's urgent." The tall boy wearing sunglasses took a deep breath.
He gritted his teeth and shouted, "Stock market. Something happened in the stock market, our stock price is falling wildly." What? The bull-headed monster Ager trembled all over. It suddenly raised a cow foot with a recurved joint. After crushing the human girl's head, it shouted loudly. "Who is it? Who is sniping my stock price? That's all my wealth, mine."
"Mr. Ager, it's everyone. All the capital that has had a grudge with us in the past. Even companies that have nothing to do with us are eating our flesh and blood. Notify the Public Relations Department. Hold a press conference immediately. Let the manager of the financial department call the director of the exchange." However, facing a stock price crisis that could tear apart a multinational company, the bull-headed monster Ager gradually calmed down. It actually bent down again and picked up a piece of the girl's flesh and blood and stuffed it into its mouth. Finally, call a meeting of directors from all over the world, since the loss of stock price has been made and cannot be recovered. Then, I have no choice but to give up. Eat some of my own people. These damn bloodthirsty capitalists, Dario Ager, will not fall so easily. Roxxon Industries will not fall easily either. Above the metal round table. Google search reading. Blue light flashed in the eye sockets of Iron Man David. It continuously projected extremely clear patterns. One after another, the construction drawings of the large cruise ship, Minotaurs, appeared in front of Rorschach. Iron Man David raised his metal palm and slowly introduced. This large cruise ship belonging to Roxxon Industries weighs 110,000 tons. According to the original design,
It can accommodate 1,500 people. Of course, this refers to the situation of full load of tourists. However, according to the video data of many ports, the permanent population on board, in addition to the necessary crew members, is no less than 500 people. That is the private bodyguard team of Roxxon Industries.
My lord, please forgive my usurpation. I think the problem that can be solved by a few missiles is not worth your personal effort. Iron Man David's eyes slowly fell on Rorschach's face with squinting blue wolf eyes.
Rorschach with fluffy gray hair smiled slightly. He showed his fangs and said, "This is just a backup plan, David. If the other party's bodyguards are all superpowered, then the power of a few missiles may only kill a large number of mortals." The projection suddenly stopped and dissipated in the air. Iron Man David shook his metal palm again and said confidently, "My lord, you can rest assured. I have hacked into Hammer Industries and Stark Industries through the mobile phones of a large number of staff members. Among them, there are still some stocks of the Jericho missiles made by Stark before he became Iron Man that have not been destroyed. And the similar imitation, X-Wife Type 2, improved cruise missiles made by Hammer Industries have also come into my control. The goods in their experimental site are enough to start a war. Under the double attack of quality and quantity, I think a mere large cruise ship may be difficult to resist. Okay, David. I'll tell you the truth, I just want to test the new armor." Rorschach, grinning, couldn't help but spread his hands. Complained to Iron Man David. Iron Man David shook his metal head slightly. There seemed to be a hint of helplessness in his mechanical voice. "My lord, you should be the commander sitting on the Diaoyutai, not the general charging the trap." Rorschach, narrowing his blue wolf eyes, was about to make a joke. But his eyes noticed that the angry Jessica rushed into the base like a gust of wind. Rorschach waved his hand at Iron Man David and said, "When the other party's directors gather, notify me immediately. Jessica, control your anger. You have to learn to control your emotions." Hearing Rorschach's loud rebuke, Jessica, who was surging with anger, took a few deep breaths repeatedly. After a few dozen seconds, she walked to the side of the metal round table. She spread out the heavy documents she had been holding in her hand to Rorschach and Iron Man David. "Boss, it turns out that many girls have disappeared from Central City High School over the years, and they were all concealed by the school's board of directors, apart from some who were involved in criminal cases and ran away from home. Almost 1/3 of the girls who really disappeared were lured to the Roxxon Industries Minotaur by headhunters with various high-paying jobs. I have used my connections among students to inquire, and some of the girls who boarded the ship have never returned home. And they all have the same characteristics. Their families are poor and they desire wealth, but they have exquisite looks and beautiful figures. Rumors say that they are basically conservative believers who keep themselves clean and have never had a boyfriend or girlfriend." At this moment, Jessica's eyes were wide open, her breathing was heavy, and her teeth were clenched. Squeak! One of her palms was deeply embedded in the metal round table. There was a harsh sound of metal twisting and deforming. After listening carefully to Jessica's words, Rorschach, whose expression never changed, licked his fangs and said calmly, "If that ager is really some kind of alien, then I'm afraid that the beautiful lives of all the girls on board have long disappeared. The only thing we can do is to avenge them and make more aliens and heretics pay a painful price. Kill them until they think that humans are the masters of the earth. Kill them until they are on the verge of extinction. Kill them until they are only afraid of humans and dare not raise any weird thoughts. Jessica, you have done well. This is not your fault. You must remember the anger burning in your heart now, but don't let the surging emotions completely control your thinking. After all, reason is the most important bargaining chip in battle." As soon as the voice fell, Rorschach slowly stood up. He waved to Jessica, indicating that the other party should keep up with his pace. Jessica took a deep breath again. After blinking her eyes, she hurried up. Rorschach, with a calm expression, took Jessica into the equipment room. He picked up the set of Sun-style Void combat armor in the display case. He turned around and handed it to Jessica. Rorschach stared at the other party's fiery eyes that seemed to be burning with fire. He blinked his blue wolf pupils a few times. He said solemnly, I will take you to participate in this operation. I know it may be too early and your training is not yet complete, but I think it is a good thing to let you see the future battlefield situation in advance."
Jessica, with a solemn face, stretched out her hands and took the combat armor.
She nodded her head heavily at Rorschach and said, "Boss, I won't let you down. No, you're not fighting for me. You're fighting for yourself, for those missing girls who make you feel the same, and for all of humanity."
Rorschach, with his fangs bared, shook his head slightly. The gray hair on his head swayed slowly. "However, I'll also make 3 rules for you. The most important thing on the battlefield is to obey orders and be merciless. Even if the opponent is just a child who looks weak, you must be mentally prepared to kill the opponent in advance. Forget it, it's better to experience it yourself than to say too much. I think this combat armor is enough to protect your life." Rorschach, with a calm expression, stared at Jessica, who was gradually getting nervous with flickering eyes, and smiled slightly. Afterwards, he didn't say anything more. Instead, he asked Jessica to adapt to the weight and combat status of the combat armor as soon as possible. When Jessica walked out of the equipment room with a solemn expression, Rorschach, with his blue wolf eyes narrowed, set his sights on the hunter armor not far away. He turned around and took out all the standard explosive bombs from the corner of the equipment room, and checked the number. Rorschach, who thought he had consumed too much, reopened the simulator's salvage page. He chose a 10-round salvage. Then, looking around, Rorschach picked up the Necron's Gauss explosion gun again. He carefully looked at the strange green light swinging back and forth in the transparent pipes. He subconsciously murmured with his fangs bared, "An alien and its super-powered guards. I want to see if you can withstand my firepower." Boom boom boom. Valkyrie's vector turbine engine is roaring low. The thin clouds were continuously rolled up by the fierce air currents. It quickly scratched the metal surface of the armed transport aircraft.
Just inside the dimly lit cabin, Rorschach, who is wearing hunter armor, is sorting out the weapons and equipment he carries.
In this operation, he only brought a plasma pistol and a Gauss blaster.
Coupled with the dual bolt guns in the Hunter Lord armored gloves, it provides a large amount of ammunition. Enough to deal with any enemy. The next moment, Rorschach, with swaying gray hair, raised his chin.
The cyan wolf pupils in the dim light reflected a faint green light.
He looked at the void combat armor sitting on the cabin seat and shouted,
"Jessica, check the weapon standby status. Activate the refraction field in advance. There are still weak spots on the combat armor."
"Understood, boss." Jessica's dull voice came from under the heavy helmet. She put down the Hell gun stiffly. He moved the refraction field generator hanging on his chest.
Buzz. Along with the buzzing sounds, an invisible refraction force field enveloped the entire figure. Oh, new recruits. Not far away, Rorschach couldn't help but smile.
The fangs in his mouth were exposed. He casually hung 5 Dawn of War blinding bombs on the waist of Liju's armor.
Finally, Rorschach, armed with several weapons, raised his gravity chute.
He turned his head and shouted in the direction of the cockpit. "David! How far is it from the target location?" A few seconds later, Iron Man David's voice came from the carapace helmet at his feet. Its mechanical voice seemed full of confidence. "My lord, there are still 300 nautical miles. You can take a break for a while. At the same time, you may not have a chance to airborne. I am still confident in my missile plan."
Hear the words of David the Iron Man. Rorschach, who raised his eyebrows, temporarily put down his gravity umbrella.
He got up and walked to the cockpit. He stared at Iron Man David's back with a smile and said,
"David, the changes in the situation on the battlefield are not a simple data calculation. Let us wait and see." Iron David had no words. It simply raised a metal palm and gave it a thumbs up.
Luo Shah, who bared his fangs, shook his head. He walked back to the original place with heavy steps moving his armor. He sat back down on the cold floor of the cabin. A huge red glove was slowly placed on top of the carapace's helmet. Because the Liju armor is not equipped with a helmet, Rorschach could only improvise and mix and match helmets from other equipment. He closed his eyes slightly. He closed his eyes and rested before the battle began.
For a moment, the only sound in the entire cabin was the low roar from the engine.
And a nervous Jessica double-checking the subtle sound of the Hell gun. About half an hour later, Iron Man David's voice came again.
My lord, we are still 30 nautical miles away from the target location. Although it has already entered nighttime, due to the good weather conditions in the nearby sea area, continuing to approach may lead to the risk of early exposure. Do you want to come and watch my missile show? No problem. Rorschach, who had his eyes tightly closed, suddenly opened his eyelids.
In the dim cabin, a pair of green wolf eyes flashed with a faint green light.
He stood up and walked behind Iron Man David. A wide view through the front of the cockpit. Rorschach saw a dark sea at a glance. That large, brightly lit cruise ship, the Minotaur. That's it. Rorschach narrowed his eyes and said to Iron Man David.
David, start your fireworks show. Before he finished speaking, Iron Man David hovered Valkyrie through the operating stick. It said without looking back, My lord, Stark Industries' Jericho missile was launched 10 minutes ago, and the little guys with a lot of fuel are on their way. Oh, they have arrived. Iron Man hasn't finished speaking yet. Whoosh whoosh. 5 bright lights suddenly flashed through the dark night sky. As the light of the engine at the rear gradually extinguished, the metal carapace at the front of the missile burst into bloom. Whoosh whoosh. In an instant, countless tiny warheads split off and quickly fell towards the large cruise ship below like a goddess scattering flowers. At this moment, Iron Man David's eyes flashed with blue light. A metal finger waved slightly, as if directing the arrival of countless warheads. However, just when a large number of tiny warheads are about to hit the target, the warheads that appeared in Rorschach and Iron Man's field of vision gradually slowed down. Finally, he was frozen in mid-air by an unknown force. Immediately afterwards, a large number of tiny warheads began to explode out of thin air, triggering a chain reaction. Boom boom boom. Waves of horrific explosions and flames continuously illuminate the brilliant lights on the large cruise ship, like a real fireworks show. Valkyrie's cabin interior. The expressionless Rorschach raised a huge glove and placed it on Iron Man David's metal shoulder. He suppressed a smile and consoled him. Maybe it's a person with superpowers who can control magnetic fields or air. This unscientific. As if in a daze, the Iron Man David shook his metal head slightly. The blue light in his eye sockets flickered violently. The mechanical voice was full of emotional fluctuations. My lord, please rest assured. The X-Wife Type 2 cruise missile of Hammer Industries has been launched 5 minutes ago, and the number alone is enough. Rorschach, grinning, was silent. He could only smile helplessly. He did not say anything to hit the confidence of the Iron Man David. 3 minutes later, 10 brighter and brighter lights once again crossed the dark night sky. It fell towards the location of the large cruise ship. The next second, a human figure that looked very short quickly took off from the inside of the cruise ship. The speed was so fast that it even burst into bursts of sonic booms. At the same time, 2 scorching energy rays shot out from the opponent's eyes. It actually intercepted the cruise missiles that were about to hit with great accuracy. Boom! In an instant, the huge explosion of fire once again illuminated the entire night sky. The next second, Rorschach on Valkyrie couldn't help but widen his blue wolf eyes. He subconsciously murmured, "Is this fucking Superman?" David, prepare to airdrop. Rorschach, with a solemn expression, immediately issued an order. He was about to turn around. He heard the mechanical voice of Iron Man David again. My lord, the other party seems to have found the trace of the transport plane. Before the voice fell, Rorschach looked through the view of the cockpit. A short figure that broke through the sonic boom actually rushed towards the direction where Valkyrie was hovering. Rorschach took a deep breath and rushed into the cabin. He quickly put on the gravity parachute and put on the helmet. He said to Iron Man David through the internal channel. David, is the weapon system on Valkyrie working properly? My lord, needless to say, I understand what you mean. I will make good use of these weapons to make up for my mistakes. Hearing the answer of Iron Man David, Rorschach, who entered the combat state, twisted his neck slightly. He walked quickly to Jessica, who stood up. The huge red glove grabbed the gap between the energy backpack of the Hell gun and the combat armor.
Click, accompanied by the sound of the valve turning when the hatch was opened. Whoosh whoosh, a stream of humid sea breeze with a salty smell kept pouring into the cabin. Jessica, close your eyes if you are afraid of heights. Rorschach's calm voice was transmitted to the inside of the other party's helmet through the channel. However, before he could finish his words, the Valkyrie weapon transport suddenly ended its hovering, flying forward quickly. At the same time, the quadruple laser cannon on the wing also made a fierce buzzing sound. Whoosh 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 whoosh. In an instant, Rorschach seemed to smell the burning smell of the air. Then, the voice of Iron Man David was also transmitted to his ears. My lord, I will create a suitable opportunity, you prepare to airdrop. There is another good news, flying superpowers dare not touch lasers at all, their defense capabilities may not be enough. The silent Rorschach started the gravity parachute behind him without hesitation.
The two engines suddenly erupted with hot white flames.
Jump. A few dozen seconds later, following the prompt of Iron Man David,
Rorschach, who had been prepared for a long time, grabbed Jessica's combat armor and rushed out to the night sky outside the cabin. Whoosh! The biting sea breeze kept pouring into the gap between the neck. Rorschach, who was falling rapidly, raised his head slightly.
He saw Valkyrie fighting with the fake Superman in the night sky through the helmet.
Under the flexible control of Iron Man David, the Valkyrie transport plane today is like a dancing bird, and it has exerted more functions beyond its normal.
Countless tricky maneuvering skills that are difficult for humans to control are constantly presented.
The scorching laser cannons almost locked the flight trajectory of the superpower. Rorschach, completely relieved, retracted his sight. His attention was completely focused on controlling the gravity parachute. Because the gravity parachute carries extra weight beyond that of a single person, so the speed of descent is much faster than expected. 3,000 meters, 1,000 meters, 500 meters. With the rapidly approaching target, in order to ensure the safety of both parties after landing,
Rorschach had to lift Jessica up with force. Aim at the swimming pool on the large cruise ship. Jessica, are you ready? Remember, anyone who attacks you is an enemy.
Understood, boss. Hearing Jessica's reply, Rorschach took a deep breath and chose the right time.
He loosened Jessica's combat armor. Whoosh! Jessica, wearing combat armor, crossed a distance of more than 100 meters. She fell heavily into the swimming pool, and in the blink of an eye, a large piece of water splashed. Boom! A few seconds later, a nimble figure jumped out from the bottom of the pool.
Buzz buzz buzz. The roar of the Hell gun suddenly sounded. It fired at the enemies who gradually surged onto the deck. For a moment, broken limbs and arms flew everywhere. The fierce gunshots and human wailing were like a continuous movement. It resounded throughout the deck of the large cruise ship. Boom! A few seconds later, the heavier Hunter Lord armor fell heavily to the ground. There was a terrifying loud noise. Ding ding ding. The next moment, the protective force field that had been activated long ago stopped the rapidly rotating metal bullets.
Rorschach quickly straightened his back. Two huge red boxing gloves were suddenly raised.
The dark muzzle of the grenade was exposed. Crash. Countless metal bullets on the protective force field kept clanging to the ground, making a crisp sound. He stared at the human enemies who surrounded him and kept firing. A low voice slowly came from the inside of the helmet. It's my turn. Boom boom boom. The roar from the bomb resounded through the night sky.
More than a dozen unlucky humans were instantly blown into pieces by the penetrating bomb.
A large amount of splattered bones and flesh quickly injured nearby teammates. They kept wailing in pain. Boom boom boom. With the powerful power brought by the electronic muscle bundle, Rorschach, as strong as a bull, rushed into the enemy's front like a storm. Puff. A huge fist glove waved casually with just one blow to smash the enemy's upper body. Then, Rorschach, with no mercy, turned the muzzle on the glove again. Boom! The roar of the bomb sounded again. He used only one ammunition to smash several overlapping human bodies. After a few dozen seconds, the gunfire surrounding the hunter's armor gradually became sparse. finally disappeared completely. At this moment, only the roar of the Hell gun not far away kept coming. Around the landing site, dozens of enemies who dared to attack Rorschach. All turned into blood and flesh all over the ground. Surrender. We surrender. The 3 human bodyguards, trembling all over and with wet lower bodies, subconsciously discarded their guns. They knelt on the deck with horrified expressions on their faces, trying to beg for mercy from the terrifying mechanical monster in front of them.
Boom boom boom. Rorschach, who remained silent, took heavy steps.
He walked in front of the other party. Click, he turned his wrist to refill the ammunition of the grenade gun in his glove.
He asked in a low voice, "How many superpowers are there in your bodyguard team?"
At this time, a white man with a flickering look glanced at the mutilated corpses around him. He kept swallowing his saliva and said, We are actually just a little bit stronger in terms of strength and recovery ability." Rorschach tilted his head and looked back at the corpses on the deck and fell silent. Then, he raised his hand and pointed at the lasers that occasionally flashed in the dark night sky, and continued to ask, "What's the situation with the flying laser eye?" Before the white bodyguard continued to speak, the other black bodyguard quickly moved his knees.
He tried to squeeze out a twisted smile. "That's one of the boss's confidants. We are just some paid bodyguards. By the way, please be careful, our bodyguard captain is also the boss's confidant. She has very powerful superpowers and is good at controlling magnetic fields and metals."
The silent Rorschach nodded slightly. He casually removed the gravity umbrella behind him. "Throw it on the nearby deck." At the same time, a Gaussian blaster with a strange green light in the transparent pipe was picked up again. Faced with a variety of superpowers, it takes the extremely materialistic Necrons to deal with it.
However, just when Rorschach was about to continue asking, swish, a series of scorching lasers suddenly brushed past the protective force field.
The terrifying laser storm smashed the humans in front of them into countless pieces of meat in the blink of an eye. "Boss, the deck has been cleared." Then, Jessica's trembling voice, which was obviously full of tension and excitement, reached Rorschach's ears. Rorschach, wearing a helmet, turned his head and glanced at the recruits who were approaching quickly. He did not care about the other party's small mistake just now. "Who?" Rorschach exhaled and ordered again. "Jessica, enter the lower cabin, quickly clear the enemy, and evacuate the innocent crew members on the cruise ship."
Yes. Jessica nodded heavily. She held the still cooling Hell gun. She ran towards a nearby hatch, until the back of the combat armor disappeared.
Rorschach, wearing a helmet, scanned the empty deck again. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment, and according to the drawing line in his memory, he ran towards the position of the upper cabin. Boom. A minute later, a closed internal hatch was torn open by Rorschach's huge fists, accompanied by a violent sound of metal twisting. The heavy metal hatch was thrown to the ground casually. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The next moment, the flying metal fragments seemed to have life. Suddenly flew up from the nearby ground, keep hitting the protective force field of the armor. At the same time, at the end of the brightly lit corridor, a white-haired girl with blood constantly flowing from her nostrils rushed out of the shadows. She raised a white-skinned palm with an expressionless face, and her fingertips kept trembling. A large number of rotating and jumping metal fragments kept hitting the protective force field. Try to cause more damage to Rorschach. However, the protective force field of the hunter armor made specifically for the Hive nobles. It is far from being easily broken by a superpower who controls the magnetic field. Before Rorschach raised the muzzle again, the white-haired girl who found that the metal fragments were futile seemed to change her mind immediately. She suddenly raised her other palm. The shaking hands were pointed in the direction of Rorschach. The white-haired girl didn't care about the sticky blood that kept flowing out of her nostrils. The invisible magnetic field gradually penetrated into the interior of the protective force field. It directly acted on the metal of the hunter's armor. Squeak. The next second, relying on his own strength and the huge bonus of the electronic muscle bundle, Rorschach, who resisted the change of the magnetic field, actually lifted the Gauss blaster in his gloves. He pulled the trigger suddenly. Swish, a terrifying green beam shot out from the muzzle. It passed through the entire corridor in almost the blink of an eye. It hit the chest of the white-haired girl with great accuracy. In an instant, the other party with a blank look in his eyes didn't even have time to make any sound. Swish! The whole person quickly evaporated, completely restored to a bunch of scattered green atoms. Ding ding ding, accompanied by the sound of a large number of metal fragments falling to the ground. Rorschach lowered his head and glanced at the Gauss blaster. He subconsciously murmured, "Maybe in addition to the bolt gun, I also like the stuff of the Necrons." Then, Rorschach, who had returned to silence, drove the electronic muscle bundle of the hunter armor. He began to run deep into the corridor, until the tall figure arrived in front of a gorgeously decorated metal door. Swish! Without hesitation, Rorschach pulled the trigger of the Gauss explosive gun again. A series of terrifying green beams corroded and evaporated the heavy metal. Boom! With the harsh sound of a large amount of metal falling one after another. Rorschach, who was brewing murderous intentions, stepped into Dario Agger's private cabin. However, the bloody scene that came into view, it made the tall body wearing armor pause for half a second. It was not fear, but confusion, under the illumination of bright lights. Countless mutilated bodies of men, women, old and young were scattered in every corner of the cabin. The smelly blood flowing from a large number of corpses almost soaked the ornate wooden floor. And judging from the gorgeous and expensive broken clothes, they seemed to be the board members of Roxxon Industries. At the same time, a bull-headed monster wearing an exquisite suit was sitting in a boss chair. It stared greedily at the mechanical monster that broke in. It was still gnawing on a broken human arm. It slowly raised its other hand. A mysterious crystal ball emitting brilliant, colorful light. Gradually, waves of strange energy ripples appeared. "Welcome to my Minotaur, damn bastards, you." However, before the other party could finish his words, swish, green beams from the Gauss explosion gun shot towards the Minotaur. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. The seemingly strange and mysterious unknown power did not have any blocking effect. A terrifying green beam of light almost instantly penetrated the layers of rippling energy ripples. It hit the chest of the bull-headed monster Agger with great precision. "This is impossible, this is." The opponent, who was originally full of confidence, suddenly opened his eyes wide. A stream of hot air spurted out from the huge nostrils. It subconsciously uttered an unbelievable cry. At the same time, the crystal ball in the palm of the hand that was emitting bright colorful light was about to undergo more strange changes. But it was too late. Swish! One after another, green beams of light kept bombarding the body of the bull-headed monster. In the blink of an eye, the opponent was evaporated, accompanied by the green atoms that were still escaping. Rolling, the crystal ball that suddenly dimmed fell on the wooden floor. It slowly rolled to the vicinity of the incomplete corpse, covered with dirty blood. Kaka, Rorschach, holding the Gauss blaster, shook his neck left and right. A dull voice came out from the inside of the helmet. "You are so brave to eat a human in front of me." Then, he took heavy steps. He stepped on the blood and flesh all over the floor and walked to the center of the room. Rorschach looked down at the dim crystal ball. He picked it up carefully and looked at it for a few times. A strange item that could be used by the bull-headed monster Agger to turn the tables. It is worth a careful exploration. However, he repeatedly examined it for a long time. He did not find anything strange. Rorschach had to throw the crystal ball into the ammunition bag behind his waist. Save it for later research. After scanning the bloody private cabin again, Rorschach pulled out all the computer hard drives from under Agger's desk and threw them into the ammunition bag. Then, he raised his gloves. He tapped the helmet with his fingertips and asked the communication channel. "David, the mission target has been annihilated. Do you need help?" At this moment, Iron Man David seemed to be still fighting. He said nothing to Rorschach's question. Rorschach, who had no time to continue exploring, picked up the Gauss blaster again.
He turned and ran to the top of the deck. He changed the communication channel and ordered Jessica.
Jessica, the mission is completed, prepare to evacuate. Ah, boss. I just evacuated some crew members. There are still many remaining enemies hiding in the lower cabin. After listening to Jessica's report, Rorschach, who was running, immediately replied.
Don't go deep, don't get entangled with them. Return to the deck immediately, David may need support. Understood. At this moment, driving the electronic muscle bundle, Rorschach, who was rushing like a bull, had passed through the broken hatch. Back to the top of the deck again. He suddenly raised his head. He stared at the dark night sky through his helmet. The Gauss blaster in the huge glove was slightly raised, ready to go. Even the blinding bullet hanging on his waist was ready to be thrown. Buzz buzz buzz. However, accompanied by the terrifying light of the laser cannon in the night sky and the low hum of the vector engine. Boom! A corpse that was burned to charcoal suddenly fell from the sky. It actually landed directly on the deck not far away. Whoosh! At the same time, the Valkyrie transport plane swung its wings back and forth like a show of skill. It flew low over the brightly lit cruise ship. My lord, it's done. The mechanical voice of Iron Man David sounded again from the communication channel. It seemed to be full of complacent emotional fluctuations. Huh. At this moment, Rorschach slowly exhaled. He stared at the metal figure of Valkyrie climbing up quickly, and said lightly. David, save fuel. You don't want to swim back to land, do you? Ah, yes, my lord. The next moment, Rorschach, standing on the deck, straightened his back. He seemed to relax a lot, listening to the shouts of the crew members coming from the rear of the cruise ship, and the noisy sound of the lifeboat falling. Not long after, a slight collision from the combat armor came slowly. Rorschach turned his head and looked. Jessica, holding the Hell gun in both hands, was running towards his position quickly. And from the other party's determined movements and excited steps, it seems that she has gradually adapted to the atmosphere on the battlefield. Well, the mission was a complete success. Rorschach, who narrowed his blue wolf eyes inside the helmet, murmured subconsciously. Dash 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 dash. Buzz, accompanied by the roar of the Valkyrie transport plane's engine. Standing at the door of the cabin, Rorschach stared at the deck of the Minotaur that was gradually receding. Just behind him, Jessica, who had just taken off her helmet, wiped the sweat from her forehead and gathered her short hair. Her bright eyes blinked quickly a few times, and she looked down at her still shaking hands. She gradually took deep breaths to calm her emotions. At this moment, 5 bright lights once again crossed the dark night sky. They fell towards the large cruise ship with brilliant lights. This time, the cruise missile successfully hit the target without any obstruction. The terrifying explosions and flying debris completely destroyed most of the structure of the Minotaur. A large amount of cold sea water continued to pour into the gradually cracked cabin, trying to slowly drag the heavy hull to the bottom of the sea. On the nearby sea, the crew members on the lifeboats paddled in great fear. They kept shouting and trying to escape the terrifying vortex that was about to appear. On the Valkyrie that was gradually going away, Rorschach, with an expressionless face, also took off his helmet. He sniffed the salty sea breeze and stared at the gradually sinking large cruise ship. He closed the cabin door casually. Rorschach looked back at Jessica, who was still in a daze. He lowered his head and thought for a while. He did not go forward to disturb the other party. Then, Rorschach entered the cockpit. He looked at the back of Iron Man David, thought for a moment and said, David, thank you for breaking the rules, otherwise it would not be so easy for us to deal with a flying enemy. Iron Man David shook his metal head slightly, the blue light in his eye sockets kept flashing, and he controlled Valkyrie and said, My lord, this is my duty. Moreover, the other party was obviously killed by Valkyrie's machine soul, and it was not me, David, who did it myself, so this is not considered a violation of the rules, don't you think? Haha, you're right. Rorschach, who narrowed his blue wolf eyes, smiled slightly.
He raised his huge red boxing gloves and gently patted Iron Man David's shoulder. After the two briefly exchanged the time it would take to go home. Rorschach, who successfully appeased David, turned around and returned to the corner of the cabin. He chose a corner to sit down. Just as he was about to close his eyes and rest for a while, he suddenly remembered something. Rorschach looked at Jessica, who had fallen asleep in the seat. He reopened the simulator page. He just remembered the ordinary salvage before the operation. At this moment, the countdown for the 10th round of salvage has already been completed. Waiting for Rorschach to check,